Hi there. Just as I was finishing up my last video on how we're getting the first Westeros PC game in 12 years, we got an even bigger announcement from Warner that they're restructuring their entire video game division. Now, long term, this is much bigger news than one game, that this will be affecting us on a franchise scale for many years. So it's important to understand it, that this is the biggest shakeup we've had since 2012, arguably ever, because Warner never really paid much attention to their video game division that entire decade. But the new leadership over the past year has said they're launching all these new initiatives that, with phases moving ahead, they are planning out multiple Westeros video games, and they have actually put their money where their mouth is. We are seeing announcements, we're seeing development plans. We need to understand, on a scale of years, who is doing what and in charge of this, because in many ways, we never really had a video game branch of this before, the way that there's the video game branch of fandoms for Marvel and DC Comics, the way there is for Star Wars. Westeros video games wasn't really a thing. I went over that in the last video, that it just failed to start. It's also important to understand, because the actual restructuring they're doing is a bit complicated, that it isn't simply we replaced the old CEO of 12 years with a new one. They're doing this complicated power-sharing trifecta thing, which actually does make sense when you hear them explain it. Of particular interest to us, who's handling Westeros content is actually going to be a man who is a veteran of the Fallout franchise. It's a veteran from Bethesda who joined Warner a year ago, got put in charge of that subunit, and is now in charge of that third of the company handling Westeros content. I've been doing multiple reports on this as news has come out since February. A lot of good, big changes have been coming, and announcements that Warner Brothers is the only major streaming platform that still has its own in-house video game division. Disney doesn't make Star Wars and Marvel games. They contract it out to third parties. But Warner didn't really know what to do with WB games for well over a decade, and there was just this total lack of oversight, that they just, oh, it's over there in the corner. I sometimes forget we even have it. I assume they're doing well. And this all culminated in pure debacle by 2024. That there were two megaflops in a single year, two decade-scale megaflops, where we had Suicide Squad and Multiverses in the same year. So I have all these videos going over the financials for Warner as a whole, that this is a measurable chunk of the pie chart, that combined, their video game division lost $350 million in 2024. This practically equals the profit from their streaming division. It's a mess. And I have all these other videos on that. So the new leadership under David Zaslav was, focused on getting the streamer up and everything. They said, we'll get around to the video game stuff. The video game stuff isn't Zaslav's fault. I mean, this was all, Suicide Squad was well on its way to being it was long overdue and well on its way to being a disaster by, 2019. So this isn't them. But since, Game of Thrones started, it's why didn't you put effort into this as late as 2012? That they weren't doing anything. So as they've been revving up for, merging their companies and splitting and all that, and we need to have a plan for video games, they finally put their foot down and said, maybe we should pressure the current CEO of Warner Games to resign. They did it politely, though. I mean, they didn't, throw him out on his rear end. That, David Haddad, the CEO from 2012 through 2024, they said he will be stepping down, but he will be leading a 3-month-long transition period. They said that back in February, so we were wondering what's going on by summer now. And we didn't know what shape that would take. They just announced, we are going to be doing massive restructuring as part of actually making good use out of the video game division. But the biggest part of this revamp, which started spring of 2024, that we already knew there were problems in the pipeline, that they said we are going to be refocusing after these disasters. Biggest guiding principle that Warner said is that moving forward, we are only going to focus WB Games on exactly 4 core franchises and nothing else. DC Comics, Mortal Kombat, Harry Potter, and Game of Thrones. I'll switch to saying Westeros games more, because it's weird to keep saying Game of Thrones games like every other line in this. You know what I mean, but the first 3 out of 4 of these have all had successful hit games in the 2020s. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy, that if you think, oh, Mortal Kombat's that old game, the rebooted Mortal Kombat, in case you're not a game person, the rebooted Mortal Kombat 1 that came out in 2023 was a hit. Various big DC Comics projects, they have all had large-scale games, many of them hits. The fourth one, though, Game of Thrones, they hardly made any Westeros games. I go over this in the video before, just showing the slides here quickly, of you barely made any video game content for this. I mean, we had maybe 1 video game of note in the entire run of Game of Thrones, the Telltale Story Choice game, which was right after Season 4, meant to be concurrent with it, which was a decent game. Effort went into it. The weirdest thing is when Game of Thrones hype was hitting fever pitch in the later seasons, the quality was lower, but the spectacle was higher in terms of the budget, the scale they were putting in. After Season 6, you think someone would want to commission a Game of Thrones video game where you can play along in the Battle of the Bastards or something, but there was nothing. And it was odd. I mean, even for greed, you'd think they'd make something. And they didn't. I mean, they sold mobile game rights. I mean, that was a big contract, and you think they tried to do more than that with it, but it was just a failure of imagination. So we're sitting around waiting for who is going to lead Westeros into this new era, where, like Star Wars with, Knights of the Old Republic, we have big games that we're actually playing, maybe for story stuff. I know we're fan modding things, and it might not be an original story. Maybe it's just, I want to, play along my version of Aegon's Conquest or the Dance of the Dragons and recreate it at that. Maybe it won't be story, a lot of, just the opportunities video games give us. We were waiting to hear who the successor was. Well, the surprising news that just came out in a new Variety article is that there isn't going to be one single CEO in charge of everything. Instead, they're going to internally divide WB Games. Not break it up. Let me make that clear. There aren't 2 separate video game companies. It's all WB Games. But it's sort of a power-sharing arrangement between more than one executive. 3 executives, actually, who each hold the rank of senior vice president. So there's this trio of them, a triarchy, if you will. And the Variety article directly said, we are not sure if this is permanent. They didn't mention if this is permanent or temporary, but I'm saying it sounds permanent, that this sounds like a long-term solution, particularly because it's actually a pretty sensible idea when you go through it of how to divide it up. Remember, I said they're retrenching back to just focus on 4 core franchises. They're internally dividing WB Games into 2 halves, each of which will handle games from 2 out of 4 of those franchises. One half will be Mortal Kombat and DC Comics games. The other half, the other subdivision, will be Harry Potter and Westeros games. Stop and think on this for a minute. The way they're approaching this is actually pretty good news. Because there were alternatives, other ways they could have done this. They could have divided it up by format, genre format. I mean, like they could have had the division for fighting games, the division for, like Destiny and what Suicide Squad tried to be, subscription-based online multiplayer things, another for RTS or RPGs. They could have had different divisions based on format. Instead, they're dividing it up by franchise, by story content. So it's not the tail leading the dog. What happened with Suicide Squad is after 2016, it's not just it was a big movie at the time, a controversial movie, but that's when Destiny and other big subscription-based multiplayer games came out that have in-app purchases for the subscription that you can buy better guns, better vehicles. And there was a big boom in imitators in the aftermath of that, trying to follow in the wave of, wow, these things are so lucrative. People are willing to pay money for items in a good game, not for that. So basically, the head executives went to the game division and said to Rocksteady, who did not want to do this, said, hey, we want to make this subscription-based multiplayer game. Let's just mash DC Comics into that template, round peg into square hole. They started with the genre, the format of, it's a multiplayer game, and then felt, well, let's cram a story in, versus starting with, here's DC Comics. What video game genre fits that best? I mean, what if the big hit was real-time strategy games? Would you then go, well, I guess we have to somehow find a way to turn DC Comics into a real-time strategy game? And you could do that. I can see, like, a war between Thanagar and some other planet, and you have different army units. You could kind of make that work, but it's not what DC Comics is at its core, in its spirit. Versus, like, this medieval politics thing, or epic, like Westeros or Lord of the Rings. I don't think Harry Potter could be an RTS. But you don't start with the format. You start with dividing things, in the hierarchy. Organizing it by story group, by franchise, is encouraging that they're not going to do something like that again. Or at least it'll be handled by the team who does that. And I also think the groupings, generally make sense. I mean, Harry Potter and Westeros are both fantasy. I mean, one is urban fantasy, but when you picture what you think games are like, past games, a lot of them were playing as Gandalf, fighting on the walls of Minas Tirith, or your Harry Potter characters going through the Chamber of Secrets, adventure games where you're exploring as one character. Not a strategy game, not a straight-up fighting game. But yeah, those are loosely, you can see there's a lot of crossover. Action-adventure is a very broad category, versus Mortal Kombat and DC Comics are the other half. Yeah, DC Comics. I mean, there are a lot of fighting games based on, superhero characters. Or Marvel versus Capcom and everything. That you can do that. It makes more sense than grouping Mortal Kombat with Harry Potter. Is Mortal Kombat with DC Comics. Okay, these two halves, generally that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that working. Another piece of good news, and this leads into my next section here, is that the Westeros franchise, if you're worried for a minute there, the Westeros franchise will not be taking a back seat to Harry Potter because it's grouped with it. If anything, it's the other way around, because the new guy that they put in charge as the new senior VP of fantasy of Harry Potter and Westeros combined, for the past year or so has been the guy in charge of new Westeros games. But to explain all of this, it's best for me to zoom out to go over the components that WB Games has overall right now. Then I can just quickly explain, well, this is how they're regrouping them. Because WB Games is currently made up of, this is the lay of the land, and I know this is complicated, but we've never paid attention to video game industry stuff before for Westeros. We never needed to. This is the biggest shakeup since Game of Thrones Season 1 of, we're actually going to have video games. We need to know what we're dealing with. And I have never really known what WB Games was like. I never needed to. WB Games is right now made up of 6 major development divisions. Sub-companies, subdivisions. There is no one central studio that's the main hub, pure WB Games. There's nothing that's WB Games. It's a collection of 6 subdivisions. 6 sub-companies that each primarily focus on a specific IP franchise. Probably the biggest one many of you have already heard of is Rocksteady Studios, which is their division that handles DC Comics titles. Rocksteady is based in London, England. Then there's NetherRealm Studios, which is based in Chicago, which is in charge of the best-selling Mortal Kombat franchise, and similar fighting games based on it like Injustice. Third one is Avalanche, based in Salt Lake City, which is the division that handles the Harry Potter franchise. and which was specifically responsible for mega-hit Game of the Year Hogwarts Legacy, which they're already working on a sequel for right now. Fourth one is TT Studios. It was shortened. It was originally called Traveler's Tale Studios. They shortened it to TNT Studios, which is based in England, Berkshire, England. TNT Studios is the subdivision that handles the Lego franchise and the various tie-in games that, cross-genre for, for Batman, for DC Comics. When they have Lego stuff, TNT does that. And the fifth one, WB Boston, mostly handles their MMORPGs. But the sixth and last division is WB Montreal, which in the past year was reassigned to be the subdivision actively in charge of future flagship Westeros video games. You see, up until this point, unlike all those other franchises that were tied to specific subdivisions, there simply was no subdivision within all of WB Games, which was officially the one handling Westeros games. That if you looked for, the male cubby in the office, that there wasn't one, that we don't have a Game of Thrones division. We don't even lump it in with Harry Potter, that no one is specifically in charge of this. Because looking back through, those screenshots I made of the Wikipedia lists of the few video games we ever got, those are all licensed out to third parties on the cheap, and they put very little effort into them. I mean, WB Games itself just didn't do that much with it. They used third parties. Like I said, the only one of note was the one made by Telltale, not by WB Games itself. And Telltale put a lot of effort into it. I don't like that genre of game, just, story choice, but they came up with a lot of lore for it. They recorded a lot of dialogue. You could tell effort went into this. They were going, well, let's focus on a smaller scale house, try to look at a different corner of the world. That was nice. I mean, I really appreciated the work they went. I felt bad when Telltale shut down. That was a third party. And from my last video, some of you were pointing out in the comments, well, what about that game that came out? Oh, there was a halfway decent game from Cyanide in Season 1. Yes, French company Cyanide, which is a third party, not part of WB. Well, you might point out, well, Cyanide is part of WB now, because they acquired it in 2018, but that was years later. That's my point. Years later, they got bought out by Warner, but Warner never really made its own Game of Thrones content. It just quickly licensed a few things out. So there was no internal division that was actively charged with overseeing it. This is silly. I mean, EA must have a dedicated subdivision for just the LucasArts, Lucasfilm, Star Wars content. But as part of this is why we were praising this for the past few months, as part of the large-scale restructuring, Warner started last year. In 2024, they openly announced, from this point onward, WB Montreal is going to be the main subdivision of WB Games in charge of Westeros content. Whereas before, we had none. We had jack shit. For some history, though, up until then, WB Montreal was actually one of the newer sub-companies, that it was formed in 2010, and for the next decade, throughout the 2010s, it was mostly a spillover unit, a B-team, a secondary unit to handle titles that were left over from the other subdivisions. It was an expansion unit. When I say B-team, I mean B unit like in a filming unit. That when Rocksteady was overburdened with their DC Comics list, they would hand some things over to WB Montreal. Case in point, how it started was they formed in 2010 when all these discussions were happening. Rocksteady had this hit game, Batman Arkham City, that you might have heard of, which came out in 2011. And starting 2011, as it was coming out behind the scenes, things are already in motion, they were just starting work on the sequel to that, Batman Arkham Knight, which was a huge project that didn't release for another 4 years. It came out 2015. So in 2011, Rocksteady realized we are too busy with the sequel to Arkham City, Arkham Knight, to work on a second game, much less finish Arkham Knight in less than 4 years. So we'll take our new subdivision, WB Montreal, and hand them responsibility for a prequel game set in that universe. The prequel game, Batman Arkham Origins, was by WB Montreal. That's why Rocksteady didn't do that. They were already busy on the sequel, so they said, we'll hand it over to the other division for a prequel. If you've played these games, please sound off in the comments. So that was pretty well received, Arkham Origins, but still, they were, the pickup expansion unit for Rocksteady. A similar thing happened with, after Arkham Knight, the most recent thing they did was, and the last thing they did was 2022's best-selling Gotham Knights. Gotham Knights was also by WB Montreal. So they've put out some decent work, well-respected, but whereas all the other subdivisions had like a character to them of, we're the Harry Potter unit, we're the Mortal Kombat unit, this was sort of we're the B filming unit, the expansion for Rocksteady. And, this is what it is. It's not like a ship. It's a group of people. Some new ones come in, some come out, that many of the team members in WB Montreal worked on those games. Not all of them, though. Because since 2022, there were these major staffing shakeups. The big news that happened, pause for emphasis, was that last year, Warner overall assigned a new leader to WB Montreal. So the current head of WB Montreal isn't someone who was on those DC titles like Arkham Origins at all. New person. Yves Lachance, who up to that point was actually a veteran of the Fallout franchise. He worked at Bethesda for many years up until just recently, and about 12 months ago, he switched over to Warner and was assigned WB Montreal, and they said he will be handling the Westeros franchise. So we actually already knew that he was in charge of Westeros. This is just a promotion for him, which is good for us, that not only am I overseeing Westeros, the Westeros guy was promoted to overseeing the fantasy unit of Westeros plus Harry Potter. What did he work on in Fallout? Because it's a whole franchise. Lachance was the head developer on the mega-hit mobile app game Fallout Shelter, which came out in 2015. You might think I'm scoffing in this at, mobile games. I'm scoffing at cheap knockoff mobile app games. Not like flagship, we put time and effort into this mobile app games, which are unfortunately rarer than all the knockoffs people put out versus real. There is a place for real gaming on your phone if you do it right. But no, so it's the opposite. In many ways, Fallout Shelter is the gold standard. That it was such a mega hit, it is not just a household name. There is an entire subgenre of Fallout Shelter knockoffs, Fallout Shelter clones, imitators. But at the same time, it's not just, it's a little game where you press buttons to do things. It's pretty steeped in Fallout lore. Like when you go through, it's all text-based, word bubbles, but the missions you go on, the trivia games, you play Fallout Shelter, this is for people who are hardcore Fallout fans. It needs to be. And with limited resources, just, word bubbles and text and shooting things, it managed to work in something that's a pretty decent addition to Fallout as a franchise. I mean, I still have Fallout Shelter on my iPhone right now. For the past full decade, I've been running nuclear reactors to sustain power almost indefinitely. I've been maintaining greenhouses for plant life, and prodigiously breeding vault dwellers like livestock, to forge a perfect society where the mistakes of the past will not be repeated. But I digress. That Lachance was the head of Fallout Shelter, was a major success, and he's listed as some work on Fallout 4. I think it's more like when we pull people in from the office to do side quest story suggestions versus tech stuff, different genre and everything. I mean, he's also, technically in his credits, he's listed as doing some work on Fallout 76. And I know that it was buggy at launch and they've tried to fix that. But if you look at a blurb and go, he worked on Fallout Shelter and on 76, he wasn't a major figure on 76 if you don't like 76. that if you look at the Wikipedia page for Fallout 76, I tried word searching. His name doesn't even appear on it. He wasn't the developer of that. It's just we pull in people from the office to suggest side quests. He's the Fallout Shelter guy. Now, with the context of these major subunits and who is Yves Lachance, who's now in charge of everything, I can pretty quickly explain how they've been divided up in the new restructuring. Lachance has been named Senior VP of the half that will cover Harry Potter and Game of Thrones content. Given that he was already in charge of Westeros content for almost a year, again, if anything, this is the Westeros guy being put in charge of Westeros and Harry Potter, us absorbing them, not us being in Harry Potter's shadow. The other half, the Mortal Kombat DC Comics half, will be led by Sean Himmerich, the current head of NetherRealm. So up to now, he was in charge of Mortal Kombat. That the Mortal Kombat guy is now in charge of both Mortal Kombat and DC Comics titles. And keeping in mind that the Mortal Kombat reboot 2 years ago was a mega hit. Oh, I mentioned it's a power-sharing trifecta, a trio, what I keep saying half. Well, the third part of the trio is the technical division, so that's not... Will we mention that or not? It's, WB Games has 6 major development subdivisions. It also has 2 more supplementary divisions they're the tech support divisions for the others. WB Games New York, which is not named after the city, but after the state, because it's upstate. It's based in Troy, which is near Albany, so upstate New York. WB Games New York make specifically online features for multiplayer games that the other divisions make. So like the specific programs that keep track of account statistics in multiplayer rankings, that's them. That's what they do, that they handle that stuff for the other games. They make the program for that, but they don't make content on their own. It's important, but it's tech support. And the other one is WB San Francisco, which mostly works on like mobile game stuff. That's tie-ins for the other games. So the third member of the new triarchy running WB Games will be Stephen Flannery, who up to now was already the head of WB Games New York. That he's now the senior VP of the technical division. But the other 2 heads, Lachance and Himmerich, are the 2 halves, really, of the content side of things. This leaves us with the question of how the 6 major content subdivisions will be divided into these 2 halves, which are based on 4 major franchises. What are we talking about here? Well, they already said months ago that WB Montreal will be handling the Westeros franchise going forward, and Avalanche has been handling Harry Potter, so those 2 are going to be under Lachance. While NetherRealm Studios has been handling Mortal Kombat, Rocksteady does DC Comics, so those 2 are clearly under Himmerich's half. But the question is for the other 2 subdivisions, that the one out of all the 6 that I am a little confused by is, where do you put the Lego franchise? Because Lego can be anything. That's the point. That with TT Games that handles Lego stuff, I mean, well, they've done Lego Batman, they've also done Lego Harry Potter. I don't think this is going to be strictly 3 subunits in one half, 3 in the other half. It'll wind up mostly like that, because most Lego stuff is DC Comics tie-ins and that kind of thing, but if they make a Lego Harry Potter again, I think that they would simply, for that specific project, go to Lachance's group. Because it's not arranged by format. Lego is a format of game. It is a type of game. So it's not by format, it's by franchise, so I think that'll work out. Not too big of a problem, just curious of how do you categorize Lego? And one last thing to note while I'm going down the list here, is I did briefly report on this once. If you've heard of some of there were a few other minor units that got shut down in the past few months to consolidate, and the one of note was Monolith. That earlier in the year, in February, they shut down Monolith, and I had to tell people, no, this isn't impacting Game of Thrones, that this isn't the division, we're WB Montreal, Monolith has nothing to do with us. I still feel bad, though, because Monolith had a great track record over the years. I mean, how many hours I played Alien vs. Predator 2? That was Monolith. So Alien vs. Predator 2, that was a classic. They also did things like The Matrix Online, which was really ahead of its time. I mean, think of it like in 2005, you're going to try to have an MMORPG. If they made that now, it would have been a lot more successful. Ahead of its time, Matrix Online. And they also made Shadows of Mordor. So I'm sad to see them go, but these were admittedly older titles. What were they working on now? The only thing they were working on was they've been contracted to do a Wonder Woman game, which again seems like a Rocksteady pickup rather than what they wanted to do. But that was canceled. It was an early production. They canceled it, and I think if they do they'll probably make another Wonder Woman eventually on a scale of years, but they're probably starting over from scratch over at Rocksteady because they dropped Monolith. So that was just some streamlining, but this is basically what you're going to see right now. Could they? I don't think they'd shut down TNT Games. I think that Lego is its own thing enough that they'd keep it around to handle their Lego things. But the one other organizational piece of info of note is that they've changed where WB Games overall fits in the entire command hierarchy, that up until now, for 20 years, it's been part of the studios division, so it's part of the theatrical movie division, which I thought made more sense, because as a movie cycle, a game comes out every 3 to 5 years, a lot of effort goes into it, like a movie. Now WB Games is technically part of the streaming division. So the guy, the head executive giving all these announcements has been JB Perrette, the head of direct-to-consumer streaming division, and he's been decent. He's given good info, given good answers. He's not been yanking us around or anything with misinformation, but I worry that hints that they see this as more of a subscription game thing like Destiny and Suicide Squad than, look, it's a standalone RTS. I don't need it to be a subscription. I want it as a one-time thing. We'll see what happens with that, but that's where we're looking at organizationally going into the next decade.